The new Blender hair tools are insanely cool, and in this video I'll be jump-starting your learning process by going over everything you'll need to know to start creating some great looking hair. Hey guys, Steve here from CG Geek, and I have an exciting quick announcement to make before we start. I'm back for the MSI Creator Awards 2023. I'm lucky enough to be a judge again for the 3D creation category. This contest is live right now, and it's always a ton of fun. The theme this year is Imagination Makes Creators, so let your creativity soar, and in the process you have a chance to win something from the incredibly large prize pool, worth over $70,000. The deadline is July 20th, so don't hesitate and have fun creating. Some of the prizes you can win are MSI Creator laptops, like this one here. The MSI Creator Z17HX Studio is incredible for Blender in any 3D project, including the ones that we're creating right now. It's got a very durable, modern frame, but also packs a ton of power with up to an RTX 4070 GPU, making it incredible for 3D rendering. Plus you get the updated MSI pen, making it a super useful tool for many different workflows. You can find links for the MSI Creator Awards contest and the Creator laptops following the links in the video description below. And now let's get hairy. For this video, I'm kind of turning the clock back a little bit, making it slightly slower and more in-depth for an easier tutorial to follow. So I'd love to hear what you think of the format. And now for starts, fire up the latest version of Blender 3.5 to have access to the new hair tools. All right, so for the object that we'll be adding hair to, I thought it'd be kind of fun to recreate one of the Soot sprites from Spirited Away because they're just very imaginative, creative little creatures. And it's just kind of fun to create something cute while you're learning new tools. I'm gonna go ahead and hit X to delete the default cube because we hate default cubes. And then I'm gonna go Shift A and add in a UV sphere. Let me quickly turn on my screencast keys. And then just tab into edit mode, and with proportional editing enabled right here, click that little button. We'll just grab the bottom vertice there by left clicking it, and then go G and kind of pull this up a little bit to make it like a squatty sort of sphere, just because a little bit more character. And that's all you have to do. Tab out of edit mode, right click to shade smooth, and let's start adding some hair to the sphere. So the quickest way to add hair, and the one I'll be mainly focusing on, is through the curve add menu. So you go Shift A, under curve, you have the option for fur and empty hair. So if you add fur, this basically adds a preset of modifiers that add all of these geometry nodes to your object. Now, yes, the new hair system is being done through geometry nodes, and yes, at first geometry nodes might sound kind of scary, but they've made it so you don't have to know anything about geometry nodes to start using the new hair tools in Blender, and actually have a ton of power over them as well. The reason they're built on geometry nodes is because geometry nodes has like unlimited possibilities, and there's insanely cool things that you can do with them if you want to get insane. So you'll see that we have some actually decent looking hair right off the bat. And if I jump down to my modifier stack here, you can see we have a few different hair options added in with that quick hair option. Another thing to note is you want to jump over to your camera settings and change it to cycles and GPU compute. If you have fast GPU like the MSI Creator laptops do, you'll be able to render these scenes way faster. So change it to GPU compute. Then under the modifier settings here, you can see we have the first one. The first one is the hair profile. This basically affects the shape of the curve. So you start off with the radius, which is going to be just how thick that curve is. Then you have the shape, which kind of depends on if you want it to be flared at the top, flared at the bottom. Most hair kind of has a bit of a point to it, and so changing the shape to something like a 0.3 is what I found to look pretty good. But if you want like a really thin tip on that hair, you can adjust this down and make it only fat at the root. The factor min and max just allows it to change if you don't want to ever go completely to 0 at the tip there. Then you have the interpolate hair curves. Now this is interesting because this is where the hair is assigned to this specific shape. As you can see, it's attached to the surface of our sphere here. And if I was to take that out, you would lose all your hair. So this is where it's connected to that mesh, and it's using the surface UVs to interpret where the hair gets placed. So yes, if you change the UV maps, this will be changing your curve placements. Then further down, you can control the density with this value here. By adding another digit or two to this number, you can get some crazy thick hair. Ooh, something else I like to do is in the viewport, change the color to random. So the different objects have different colors. This will be more helpful later on when we add a few different objects as well. Then you have the viewport amount here. This is going to save your computer if things are starting to get laggy. You're just going to use the viewport amount to turn this down, yet you'll still be rendering at full amount. And then the interpolation guides here, this is kind of a way to make the hair process faster. And I can show you guys kind of visually what this is doing if I go into sculpt mode. So you see how you have these few white points. Maybe it's kind of hard to see, but you have a few white points across your hair there. And these guides are sort of used for other modifiers and stuff when you're affecting the hair, how many points you want across your mesh to have basically influence of the hairs next to them, if that makes sense. And as you can see here, if I grab like the comb brush, I can comb these white hairs, and by doing that, it makes all of the other hairs in the nearby radius follow that hair. In this case, it's also used for generating the hair, because if I change the distance to guides here to something small, you can see that you end up with patches of hair just around those interpolation guides. And then if you increase it, it's going to spread that hair further out from the interpolation guide to basically fill in bald spots on our model here. When left on 0 though, it also kind of just fills in the gaps automatically, so you don't have to change that number. Then we have the density mask. This is going to be where we control where we want hair and where we don't want hair, because usually objects aren't completely covered in hair, even if they're a fuzzy creature, because we're going to have things like eyeballs, for example. Speaking of eyeballs, let's go ahead and drop an eyeball in here. So I'm just going to go Shift A, add in a UV sphere. We'll scale it down a little bit smaller. We still want pretty big eyes. Then I'm going to tab into edit mode and grab it over to the left here. Then I'll add a modifier, mirror modifier. So we duplicate that over to the side. I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees along the X axis by hitting R, 90, and X. And then I'm just going to place it in front of our character here by grabbing it along the Y axis, pulling it forward. So we have some nice big crazy eyes. Now we have some eyeballs, and we don't want the hair generating inside the eyeballs, obviously. Let's go ahead and shade those smooth. So if you look in your outliner, you see that you have the sphere, which is our original mesh, and then if you drop it down, you have a curves mesh, which is basically connected to this object now. So by changing the vertex group though on the sphere object itself, you can link that to your hair mesh and have it control the density. So we're going to go ahead and change the vertex group on our sphere. So make sure you select the sphere here, jump into our weight paint settings. And if you jump over to your object data settings here, you can see we have vertex groups, and we're just going to click the plus button to add in a new one. And then I'll tab into edit mode, hit A to select all of our vertices and assign it to this group. When you tab out of edit mode back into weight paint mode here, you'll see that everything is red, and that's because it's 100% dense, you could say in this case, because we're using it for the density. So then I'm going to switch from draw to subtract. I'm just going to paint in where I don't want the hair on this mesh. And you would use this the same way if you were adding, say, a mustache to a character or something, and you only want the hair in that area. You would just paint in where you want that hair to generate. And if I jump back to object mode, select our hair, and under our modifier stack here, you can see we have density. And if we click this little button here, it will allow us to toggle it to be able to use the weight paint data to control the density here. So go ahead and click that. And then under the mask texture here, we're just going to type in actually GROUP group, because that's the default name of our vertex group. If we select our sphere and jump back to the data, it's called group. And as you can see, if I hide the eyeballs there, the hair is not generating now. If you still have some strands kind of finding their way in, that's because the interpolate hair curves, the distance to curves, might need to be tweaked a little bit here. You can see that we have what looks like a fly here, basically, with some hair on it. Now here's two different ways to adjust the length of the hair here. If you want to do it all manually, you can do it in the sculpt mode option here by choosing a tool like the grow and shrink, and then just changing your hair guides to have different lengths where you want it to be longer or shorter. Or here's a different method. We can add in a different modifier to our hair here. And to add the modifier, it's all done through the asset browser in Blender now. So we'll just split our window here. In top, we'll open up the asset browser over on the right. And here you can see we have hair options. And under hair, you can see we have a handful of different tools. So we're going to go to generation here, and you can see we have an option for generate hair curves. If we click this and just drag it right onto our sphere, you can see we lose all of our hair, and that is because if we scroll down to our modifier stack, we have the generate hair curves right there, and we just want to click this and drag it to the very top of our stack. So drop it in there, and then all we need to do is the surface needs to be connected to that UV sphere. So click that little eyedropper, select the object sphere, and now you can see we have hair generating, and it's generating really long, but that's because we have the control of the hair length right here now. So for this model, I'm going to take the hair length down to something like a 0.2, and this kind of controls all of the hair guides now right inside of the modifier stack. So there's no need to ever go into sculpt mode if you're using this, because you'll see actually that you lose control over changing any of the curves here because all of the hair control basically is being handled through this node now. This might be faster and less work if you want everything to be kind of auto-generated, and you can use things like textures to control the length. This method is kind of used for generating the hair faster, but you don't need all of the articulated hand control. I just want to do it through a simple modifier here. Now if you scroll down in your modifier stack here, we can just collapse these actually. you'll see we have a hair noise. This was automatically added when we went Shift A and added in our fur. And this adds just some randomness to your hair. You can see if I turned the view off of that, we have very straight, kind of boring hair. And instead of going over every setting, they basically do exactly what you might expect them to. You can change the scale of that texture. You can change the scale along each individual curve. I actually made this a bigger number because I thought it looked kind of cool. But again, just a lot of control because this is actually all happening in the background, like I said, using geometry nodes. If I switch to the geometry node editor, just to give you guys a quick glimpse of what it's looking like, we have all these nodes added in a hairy node tree here. So I'm going to increase the control points here because it gives me a little bit more control over the noise texture. So I'll increase that a little bit. And then I'm also going to increase the distance on our hair noise texture here to something like a 0.02. And you can see that just adds a bit more randomness to the hair that's already there. Cool. And I'll also take the shape down a little bit smaller as well, something like a 0.3. Now the last node that we might tweak a few settings on that was automatically added to our hair settings here is the frizz hair curves. And this is really cool. This kind of adds a little bit of frizziness that you'll get on longer strands of hair, and you can see what it's doing if I turn it on and off. In most cases, it's going to look pretty good, and that's why it's automatically added with the hair system here. Of course, you can delete it if you don't want it, but I think it looks pretty cool. And again, I'm just going to actually increase the strength of it by increasing the distance here a little bit, so 0.02 as well, and you can see it just adds even more of that frizziness to the hair. So let's go ahead and increase the hair count here and see what it starts looking like rendered. So under our interpolate hair curves option here, where we can control the density, we'll just crank this up to something quite a bit larger. I'm going to change this to 5. So I might take the hair length down here to like a 0.15. Now if we switch to rendered view, it's not going to look like much because we don't have any lighting or shaders added to the scene. So let's quick add some lighting. I'm just going to shift right click my cursor over here, shift A, add in a new light. This will be an area light. Super quick and dirty. I'm just going to rotate this light to be pointing at Fuzzball here. And I'm going to give it a bit more intensity. I'll give it a power of about 150, and I'll give it a nice sort of blue look to it. Cool. Now I'm going to delete the default light in the scene here, as I don't want that messing with anything. Increase the strength a bit here, and just duplicate it and rotate it over on this side for more of a purple color, as these were the colors that I kind of went with in this scene. Shift D. Rotate it one more time to the front. We can kind of change the size of these if we want to as well. And give this one more of just a basic, slightly warm color. Okay, cool. And then under the world settings, we're just going to change the color to be much darker. All right, so just throwing in a little bit of lighting already makes this look way better, but there's more to be done. And that is going to be throwing a quick shader on the hair so we can really see what it's looking like when it's rendered. So I'm just going to split my window here and jump to the shader editor. Here I'm going to click Use Nodes. I'm going to delete the principled BSDF shader by hitting X, and then I'm going to go Shift A. For the material, we'll start by going Shift A and adding in the shader principled hair BSDF. Don't add the hair, but the principled hair BSDF. And we'll connect that up to the surface. A few things I'll quick adjust before getting back into our hair generation is I'm going to add a little bit of random roughness here. So I'll go 0.2. I'll give the color sort of a bluish look, as that's sort of the color of the hair that I'm going with for this fuzzy creature. And I'll increase the radial roughness to something like a 0.6. And as you can see, if we zoom in there, that's already looking much better. I'm going to make the hair color a bit brighter. We should also quick add a material to our base sphere there. So just go New Material and give this a darker color because it will be seen through the hair. Oh, and also these eyeballs, let's go ahead and give them some life. So I'm just going to go New Material for those as well. Then I'm going to click the plus button and go New again. I'm going to change it to a black material. We're just going to select that inner dot and go Control plus on our keyboard and then assign the black material to those. And that's really all you have to do. If you want to get fancy, you would add some more roughness to the eyes and stuff, but we're keeping this pretty basic, so there you go. So now in our color management, I am just going to increase the exposure a little bit more for the lighting, making it easier for you guys to see the hair. And I'll give it a little bit more contrast as well by changing it to medium high contrast. Now that we can really see what the hair is looking like, let's go ahead and add some more variation to it. So something you might realize when you look at like animal hair or fur is there's always a bit of clumping. It's not all clumped for sure, but you will see like clumps of hair where they kind of stick together in different areas across basically any furry creature. So for this, I'm going to show you guys how you can create multiple hair groups to get even better looking hair. So as you saw before, we have curves added to our sphere, but if we just go ahead and select our sphere again and go Shift A, add in curve fur again, this adds a second curves to our hair, and this one we can give completely different nodes to get a very different looking variation of hair. So I'm just going to turn off view on the first curves so we don't get that messed up with our new curves. And for this one, I'm going to add a clumping effect. And so this can be done again through one of the pre-saved assets in the asset library that comes with the asset browser here. So I'm just going to jump to the asset browser, and under hair, I'm going to go under guides, and you can see we have clump hair curves here. I'm just going to click and drag that right onto our curves there. And you can see it gives us all kinds of clumped hair, just like we want. So if I go to my modifier stack, just like before, it's going to be added to the bottom. And I'm going to drag this up to be above the noise textures that are automatically added here. So just below the interpolate guides here, we'll have our clump hair. I'm going to leave this at 001. I want this to be slightly thicker hair than the previous hair. I'll take the shape to a 0.4. Now, just like before, I want the density to be controlled by that vertex group. So I'm going to click that texture there, type in group, and that will control it so the eyeballs don't have any of those hairs generating inside of them. But now it's time for those clump hair settings. Now for this, I'm going to uncheck existing guide map, because basically this would previously use the guide map that's being set up for the interpolate hair curves. But instead I want the clumps to have sort of their own guides for where I want the clumping to form, if that makes sense. So uncheck existing guide map right there. And then I'm just going to increase the guide distance a bit. The smaller the distance, the more guides that are going to be generated. The bigger the distance, the more spread out they'll be. So this will be a 0.2. I'm going to change the shape of these clumps to be a 0.2 as well. This kind of makes them go like that a little bit. It makes the clump a little bit more pointy. As you can see, that's some good looking clump in there. And then a little bit of tip spread. This kind of obviously does exactly what it says, flares the hairs out at the tip a little bit. For this, I'm going at 0.03, just to kind of, you can give a little bit of randomness with the clump offset option here. I went 0.1, and this just kind of randomly has them go their own directions, which I thought looked kind of good. And then you can tweak the noise options here, just like we did before. If you want a little bit more noise, increase the distance, makes them a little bit hairier and frizzier. But just this alone adds quite a bit once we turn on the other hair stack, and you can see we have this sort of variation if I toggle it on and off inside of that hair, giving us some clumping effects. And actually, instead of having the length of this controlled through the curves here, you can change from object mode to sculpt mode, switch to the grow slash shrink, and just kind of make some of these curves longer in areas if you want. Hold control to make them shorter, or just click to make them longer. So you can use these settings to kind of comb the direction that these clumps are formed. If you want them to be kind of like pokeyed up at the top of his head there, some of these kind of fallen over a little bit. And this new hair clumping just kind of adds some new variation to our hair, which looks pretty good. Now, there's actually one more hair group that I'm going to add to this to kind of show you guys some of the control you can have over the hair using these asset guides, which are really fun to play around with. Plus, if we're creating the Soot sprites from Spirited Away, as you might have remembered, they have some really long random hairs that just kind of go every direction. So that's what I'm going to be adding now with our final hair object. So as before, grab our original sphere, go Shift A, and add in a curve, fur. I'm going to go ahead and turn off our previous hair fur curves here. And for this one, I'm going to have it be controlled through the modifier stack and not the sculpt mode. So I'm going to go to generation. With our hair group selected, I'm going to grab the generate hair curves from the asset browser and drag it right onto the mesh. If you scroll down, you can see it's at the bottom. We'll move it all the way up to the top as before and give it the surface by clicking the little eyedropper, give it the surface of our character. Now you can see we have some really long, crazy hair. The problem is there's too much of it, and that's because of the interpolate hair curves option that I'm actually just going to delete. For the density, we'll do exactly what we did before. Add in our weight paint group. Oop, that's not spelled right. There we go. And under the hair curve profile, as before, we're going to go with a value between 0 and 0.5. So I'm going to go with a shape for a 0.3. That will be pretty good for now. We can always adjust the radius depending on how it looks rendered later on. But now we're going to have some fun playing around with the way this hair behaves. Starting with the duplicate hair curves. We'll also turn off the view of our sphere so we only have our curves visible, so when we drag it to it, it knows what object to snap to. And if you scroll to the very bottom, you can see we have the duplicate hair curves here. I'll pull this one up just above the noise modifiers. I'm going to change the amount down to something smaller like 5. And then I'm going to change the radius. This is going to pull all the curves tighter together. I'm going to change this to something small, like a 0.02. So we'll go 0.02 for this. And this gives us all of our curves in tight little clusters. And then comes our next node here. And this is going to be a guide. So I'm going to click over to the guides. And for this one, we want curls. Because frizzy hair kind of gets curled. Like you touched something electric and got shocked and all your hair is curled now, I guess. That's what we're thinking. So I'm going to go ahead and drag the hair curves, the curl hair curves over to our mesh. Boom. We're going to scroll down and grab it and drop it right below our duplicate hair node modifier here. And this gives us all sorts of control over the curve. Now there's a lot of settings here. You don't have to really adjust many of them if you don't want to, but you have the control here if you want it. And really the only settings I'm going to change, except for taking the factor way down to something smaller like a 0.12 or 0.13, is the factor start and end. So you can give it basically some straightness at the beginning of the curve, but if we go all the way down to a 0, and then it just gets more curled the more it gets to the tip. Frequency is just going to be increased a little bit here. I'll go up to about a value of 3 or 4. And that's really all you have to play around with. You can change the subdivision here if you want like way more control, but I found keeping this pretty small to look the best for what I was kind of going for here. So now let's just slap that hair material that we made. Fur material 2 is the one that we adjusted, and see what this looks like rendered. If we click on a rendered view here. So I'm going to turn the amount down a little bit. We'll just go down to like 3 on each of them. And then here you might want to adjust the frequency as well if you want a little less wave, perhaps. Maybe something more like a value of 2 under the frequency is better. You can also adjust the radius to adjust how crazy curled you want this hair to be. Now that we have some pretty crazy hair generation happening, we can do some work on the rendering of this hair and make it look even better too, with a few simple hair rendering tricks that I'll show you guys right now. So switching to the shader editor here, we're going to add a node to our node stack here. I'll hit N to close that off. And we're going to go Shift A and add an input hair info. Curve info? Curve info, not hair info. And using some of these different inputs, we can change the way the hair is rendered. Like the incept option here, for example, this allows us to control the color of the hair from the root to the tip. So for an example, I'll drop in a color ramp here. I will zoom in here. And if I increase the black, you can see that it's getting more black at the root and staying white at the tip. And so for this, I'm just going to go Shift A and add in a color mix node. So the root of the hair, we might want to be a little bit more blue and slightly darker, whereas our color B here will be the tip, which will be a little bit more white and brighter colored. Something like this would probably work pretty well. So then we'll use incept as the factor to combine those two colors. And if we connect this to the color of our principled shader and then connect to the surface here, you can see that the hair now is being rendered a different color at the root than it is the tip. It's a little bit hard to see, but trust me, it's happening. Another super cool way that you can make longer hairs a different color. For example, a longer hair might start getting brighter in color. You can again use a color ramp. So we're just going to add in a converter color ramp, and then we'll connect it to the length of the curves info input there. So going here, you can see that the longer hairs are going to be white and the shorter hairs are black. So if I just change this to consistent, so I'm just going to duplicate our color node here. I'll change this one from color to screen, and we'll connect this to the top factor. So I might want to make this just a little bit brighter. And if I go to here, you can see the longer hairs are now a brighter color. And that looks kind of good once rendered, again, adding more realism. Now, what if you wanted to customize the color of the hair? Well, you can do that too using UV maps. So the UV coordinates from the sphere can also be used to texture that of the hair on top of it. And so to do that, we're going to first add in a new input attribute node. And now this has to have the name surface underscore UV underscore coordinate. Let me just make that nice and big for you guys so you can see. Surface underscore UV coordinate. Now you can also see this info if we jump over to here. Surface UV coordinate. It's basically copying these attributes from the sphere. So for this, I'll just use a noise texture so it's a quick, easy way to show you guys how it's working. I'm going to add in the texture noise texture right here. Connect the vector to the vector and add in a new color ramp. We'll just connect the color to the factor. And now I just want two very different colors here so you guys can see how it's working. So I'm just gonna make this blue and red for now. And if I go to this, you can see that we have the texture unwrapped on our sphere using the UV coordinates there. And the colors can be changed here using a random noise texture, or you could even replace this with like some custom texture painted texture right here. So I'm just gonna use this to give a little bit of random variation, just for a little bit of extra realism to our hair. So some lighter colors, some slightly different hues in there. And then I'll just go ahead and mix them with the color here by duplicating that, dropping it right in, changing it to maybe a soft light, and connecting it to the bottom. Give it a 100% factor, and now you can just see the color variation that we're kind of adding in there using this node. And when rendered, you can see some of this hair is looking pretty cool. You might notice that the long hairs here don't have the right material, so I need to go to the modifier stack, and that's because I have to give it the hair material 2 that we've been working on there. The other thing that really kind of showcases the cool hair rendering here is adding some depth of field to a camera. So if you go Alt-Control-0 to snap your camera to view here, I'm going to change the focal length to be something more zoomed in, like 80 millimeters. Then I'll just hit G and the middle mouse button to zoom out. The main trick is choosing depth of field here, and then just take the f-stop down to something very small, like a 0.2. By enabling limits, and then just changing the depth of field distance here, using that crosshairs as the focus point. We'll set it right to the front of the character. So I hope you guys had some fun creating some fuzzy creatures and getting comfortable with the new Blender hair system. It's really powerful once you start learning how to combine the different assets from the asset browser to control your hair, adding multiple groups, as you can see I did here, for variations and getting some of that clumping mixed with some of the fuzzy hair, and then even some curly hair added on top of that for some crazy character designs. Plus the rendering just ends up looking really cool with the principled hair rendering options that you have. And as you can see, it's super useful to be able to render these scenes in real time, which is something that you'll be able to do with the Creator Z17HX Studio laptop from MSI. And also, if you're entering the MSI Creator Awards 2023, maybe incorporate some hair in some of your renders. As you can see, it's a ton of fun to play around with, and I can't wait to see what you guys will create. But that'll do it for me, guys. I'll see you all in a future video. Bye-bye!